Keanu Reeves looked straight at Denzel Washington on live TV and whispered, "I had a dream. Jesus told me something about you." The studio froze. Denzel's confident smile faded as tears welled in his eyes. What Keanu revealed next left millions speechless and changed Denzel forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights in Studio 7 warmed the glossy floor beneath the armchairs, casting a soft glow across the minimal set. Cameras slid into position. Audience members whispered excitedly, holding their breath for what was expected to be an uplifting conversation between two of Hollywood's most respected men. The segment was called Faith in Hollywood, a special feature meant to explore how spirituality had guided careers in an industry often seen as detached from deeper purpose. Vanessa Cruz, the poised and seasoned host, sat between two empty chairs, flipping through her cue cards one last time. She had prepared for the usual blend of charm and inspiration, anticipating light-hearted stories and thoughtful reflections. Denzel Washington would discuss his new film about forgiveness and second chances, and Keanu Reeves. Well, Vanessa wasn't quite sure what Keanu would share. He was notoriously private, almost elusive when it came to personal matters. But that was part of what made him so compelling. Denzel entered first, greeted by warm applause. He wore a classic navy jacket over a crisp white shirt, calm but carrying that familiar, commanding presence. Moments later, Keanu walked in, dressed simply, black blazer and boots, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His expression was gentle, but there was something beneath it, an undercurrent of weight, almost like a man carrying something sacred. They took their seats, shook hands, exchanged smiles. Vanessa leaned in with a practiced, warm tone. "Thank you both for being here today. I know our audience is thrilled to hear from you." Denzel nodded. "It's a joy to be part of this, Vanessa." Keanu offered a small smile. "Thanks for having us." The first few minutes flowed exactly as expected. Vanessa touched on Denzel's upcoming film, a story of redemption centered around a flawed preacher in rural Louisiana. Denzel spoke about the emotional depth of the role and the personal reflections it stirred, referencing his father's faith and how spirituality had always grounded him. Vanessa turned to Keanu next. "You've become somewhat of a spiritual figure to many," she said. "Not just for your roles, but your kindness off camera, your empathy, your humility. What inspires that in you?" Keanu shifted in his seat. For a moment he looked down, his hands resting on his knees. Then he looked up, not at Vanessa, but straight at Denzel. "I wasn't sure I was going to share this today," he began, his voice calm but low. "But I had a dream. 3 nights ago." The audience hushed instantly. Even Vanessa, who was trained to handle live unpredictability, blinked in surprise. Keanu continued, "It was one of those dreams that doesn't fade when you wake up. I saw a place, a garden, outside of time. And Jesus was there. He spoke to me, clearly, directly." He paused, glancing down briefly, then back at Denzel. His tone grew firmer, but still reverent. "And he gave me a message, one I couldn't ignore." Vanessa leaned forward slowly. "A message for?" Keanu turned to Denzel again. "For him," he said. The words hung in the air like incense, heavy, fragrant, undeniable. The energy in the studio shifted. Viewers watching at home likely noticed it too. This wasn't just an actor telling a story. Something deeper was happening. Denzel's face, usually so composed and unreadable, twitched ever so slightly. A flicker of concern? Curiosity? Maybe something older. Something buried. He sat straighter in his chair, arms tense but eyes focused entirely on Keanu. Vanessa, though stunned, held her posture like a true professional. but even she had lost her place in the conversation. "I know how it sounds," Keanu continued, voice steady now, as if the moment had given him permission. "It might seem strange, maybe too personal for TV. But when I woke up from that dream, I knew it wasn't just meant for me." He looked again at Denzel. "It was for you." Denzel opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, but said nothing. Keanu nodded, acknowledging the tension between them, the weight of the unsaid. "In the dream," Keanu said, "I was walking through a garden. Everything was alive, like creation hadn't fallen yet. Jesus was beside me. He didn't speak at first. He just walked with me, like a friend." His voice caught. He exhaled quietly, gathering himself. And then, after a while, he stopped walking. He turned to me and said, "There's someone I need you to talk to. He's carried burdens no one sees. He's fought battles in silence, but I see him." Keanu paused again. His words weren't scripted. He wasn't acting. He was recalling, almost reliving, something sacred. Then, he said your name. The audience collectively inhaled. Even the crew behind the cameras had stilled. Vanessa set her cue cards on a side table and let her hands rest in her lap. She knew there was no guiding this anymore. Something bigger had taken over. Denzel blinked slowly, his eyes now reflecting not skepticism, but something like recognition. Keanu's voice softened. I asked him, "What should I tell him?" And Jesus said, "Tell him I've never left. Tell him I'm proud of him." A hush settled over the entire studio. No coughing, no seat shuffling, no whispers, just breathless silence. "I didn't understand all of it at the time," Keanu admitted, turning to face the audience briefly. "But the more I prayed, the clearer it got. I was supposed to sit in this chair across from you and deliver the message exactly like this. No camera tricks, no soundstage performances, just truth." Denzel exhaled through his nose. His fingers, resting on the armrest, curled slightly. The camera slowly zoomed in on his expression. Still quiet. But something was shifting. Something was stirring. Something holy was unfolding, live. Denzel's silence wasn't emptiness. It was reverence. Behind the stillness in his face, something deep and ancient was unraveling. It was as if Keanu's words had touched a string buried beneath decades of public strength and discipline. And now that string was beginning to hum. Keanu didn't push further. He waited. He respected the weight of what he'd just said. Vanessa Cruz looked over at Denzel, her lips parted slightly as if on the verge of speaking, but stopped herself. For once in her long career, the right words didn't exist, not because the moment was too strange, but because it was too sacred. Finally, Denzel moved. Slowly, he leaned back, blinked a few times, then sat forward again. He didn't break eye contact with Keanu. "You saw him?" he asked quietly. Keanu nodded once. "Yes, not like a character in a story, not like art, like a real presence, full of love, but with eyes that saw through everything. And he spoke to you about me." Denzel's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "El did," Keanu said. "And not just about your work. About your heart, your journey, your struggles." Denzel leaned back again, lips pressed together, his jaw working as if wrestling with emotion. He didn't wipe his eyes, though they were clearly misted. Instead, he let the tension sit. He let the truth settle in. Then Keanu added something quieter. "I know it's not normal to say these things. I'm not a preacher. I'm not trying to be anyone's prophet. But I've learned when something like this happens, and it's real, and it keeps burning inside your chest, you have to speak." The camera cut to the audience. A young woman in the second row was clutching a tissue, tears already streaking her cheeks. An older man next to her had his eyes closed, lips silently moving in what looked like prayer. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was testimony. Vanessa finally found the courage to whisper, "What else did he say?" Keanu hesitated for just a moment. Then he spoke slowly. Said, "You've inspired millions. But he sees the parts of your story no one knows, the things you've carried in silence, and he wanted you to hear this in front of the world. I see you. I chose you. And I'm not done." Denzel's hands rose to his face now, fingers pressing against his mouth. He didn't sob. He didn't speak. But tears welled and spilled, uncontained, sacred. The audience remained completely still. No one dared interrupt. A moment of divine vulnerability was happening, not just in front of them, but within them. And for the first time in the show's history, not a single person cared about the next question. They just wanted to know what would happen next. Keanu's hands rested calmly in his lap, but his voice carried something that made the air in the studio feel still, like the whole world was listening, not just the people in the room. He took a slow breath before speaking. "In the dream," he said, "I found myself walking through a garden." His eyes were distant, but his tone was firm, grounded, every word deliberate. It wasn't like any place I'd seen before. There was no sun, but everything was lit. The trees glowed softly, the air was full of life, like it was breathing with me. Every step I took, the ground beneath me shimmered with color, and the silence wasn't empty. It felt full of meaning. Vanessa Cruz sat motionless in her chair. Across from Keanu, Denzel Washington watched, his expression now showing more than interest. It showed memory, like something deep inside him already knew what Keanu was about to say. Then I noticed I wasn't alone, Keanu said. His voice dropped slightly, not for drama, but because the weight of the next sentence deserved it. Jesus was beside me. A small gasp moved through the audience. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked with me, calm, present. There was no fear, no pressure, just love. A love I can't describe without falling short. Keanu paused, not to collect himself, but as if giving everyone else a moment to catch up to the depth of what he was saying. Then he stopped walking. We were near a tree that was taller than anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just big, it felt ancient, rooted in something eternal. Denzel's brow furrowed slightly. That's when he turned to me. And when Jesus looks at you, truly looks at you, you don't just feel seen, you feel known. Every thought, every failure, every moment of hope, it's all open, and still you feel loved. The studio remained in total silence. Then he spoke, Keanu said softly. His eyes slowly lifted to meet Denzel's. She said, "There's a man I want to talk to you about. A man who has carried the world quietly. A man who walks strong so others can rest. A man who fights in silence so others can be heard." Keanu's voice didn't waver. He said, "This man has walked through fire and still carries water for others. He holds pain he never shares, and he wonders if anyone sees him." Denzel's hands gripped the arms of the chair. His breathing changed, slower, deeper, as if something inside was preparing itself for impact. Then Jesus looked back at the garden and said, Keanu paused, eyes locked on Denzel. "The man's name is Denzel." Denzel didn't move, but his entire being reacted. His shoulders tightened, his lips pressed together. His eyes locked onto Keanu's like a man holding onto the edge of something too sacred to name. The studio felt like it had been placed under glass, still suspended. The cameras kept rolling, but no one cared about production anymore. Everyone was watching a man receive something sacred. Denzel blinked once, his jaw slightly clenched, but his eyes didn't leave Keanu. Keanu's voice was steady now, as if he had entered a different current. like the words were moving through him more than from him. After Jesus said your name, Keanu continued, I felt something shift. The light in the garden got brighter. Like heaven was focusing in. He paused for a moment and took a breath. Jesus said, he's tired, not because he lacks strength, but because he's had to carry it for so long. He encourages everyone else. He lifts others. But when he's alone, he wonders, if I still see him. Keanu's voice caught ever so slightly. It wasn't emotion for effect. It was the truth pushing against the limits of human words. Jesus said to tell you, Denzel, I do see you. I always have. And I've been walking beside you every step of the way. Denzel's shoulders shook gently. No words, just breath, just tears that hadn't yet fallen, but were ready. Keanu went on, more softly now. Showed me you, not in the roles, not on the red carpets, but you at home, late at night, talking to him, asking questions that never make it into interviews. Denzel looked down at his knees. Hell showed me your prayers, the ones no one hears, the ones where you ask if your success has separated you from the call he placed on your life. The tears came, not loud, not dramatic, but slow, undeniable, sacred. Keanu's voice didn't rise, it didn't push, it stayed low, reverent. He said, tell him I've never measured him by fame. Tell him I've only ever measured him by faith. The audience barely breathed. The host remained silent, her fingers pressed together under her chin. Keanu leaned forward slightly. And Jesus wanted you to know this. You haven't failed me. You've honored me. Even when it was hard. Even when no one saw. He paused again. I saw you. The silence after those words wasn't empty. It was full of weight, of memory, of recognition. Denzel finally looked up. His eyes were red now. Not from spotlight, not from stage, but from contact with something divine. I don't know why he chose me to say it, Keanu said quietly, but he did. And then one last sentence, firm and direct. Helen told me to tell you, he knows your heart, and he knows your pain. Denzel lowered his head into his hand, not to hide, but to finally let it come. Keanu gave Denzel space, but the atmosphere in the studio left no room for escape. The moment had taken over. This wasn't performance. It wasn't television. It was personal. It was holy. I almost didn't come today, Keanu said gently, as if confessing a secret. Not because I didn't want to see you, but because I didn't feel qualified to carry a message like that. I thought maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just my mind, my grief, my doubt. He looked up at the ceiling briefly, his voice steadying. But every day since that dream, it's been pressing on my chest like a weight, like I was carrying someone else's letter, and I hadn't delivered it yet. He looked back at Denzel. That letter was for you. Denzel was still silent, his head bowed, but the audience could see the tears now. They trailed down his cheeks, soaking into the collar of his shirt. Keanu continued, in the dream, after Jesus spoke your name, he started walking again. But this time, he looked back at me and said, tell him I haven't forgotten the promise I made to him as a child. At that, Denzel lifted his head slightly, his eyes fixed on Keanu's with quiet shock. Mel said, he still remembers that moment at the altar, the call he felt, the tears he couldn't explain. I haven't forgotten, and neither has he. A visible tremble passed through Denzel's hands. That memory, private, sacred, buried for decades, had just been spoken aloud by someone who had no way of knowing. You were 9, Keanu added softly, in a small church, sitting next to your mother, and something came over you that you never forgot. Denzel closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and sliding down his face like a line carved into stone. He didn't nod, he didn't confirm, but something in his stillness told the world that Keanu had spoken the truth. And he said one more thing, Keanu said. He said, "I never change my mind about him." The audience gasped softly. A few began weeping. Someone in the back whispered, "Thank you, Lord." The camera caught Vanessa Cruz gently wiping the corner of her eye. Denzel sat up straighter now, as if a weight had been lifted, or maybe shifted, from his shoulders. The man who had carried so many others was now receiving something for himself, something deeper than comfort, a reminder of identity, a confirmation of calling. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his role as messenger complete, for now. But the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like a room filled with angels holding their breath, because something eternal had just been spoken, and everyone who witnessed it would never forget it. Keanu took a slow breath, steadying himself before continuing. His eyes didn't move from Denzel's. The atmosphere was still suspended in reverence. No one in the studio had shifted in their seats for several minutes, not even the crew. "There was more," Keanu said quietly. "More that Jesus showed me in the dream." Denzel didn't speak. He simply watched, the tracks of tears still fresh on his face. His body leaned forward slightly now, drawn in, as if waiting for words he didn't even know he needed. "In the dream, after Jesus said your name," Keanu began, "he stopped near a small stream running through the garden. The water was clear, but it carried weight. Like it wasn't just water, it was memory. I looked down and I saw images, moments." His voice dropped, gentle but unwavering. "I saw you walking into hotel rooms late at night after award shows, rooms full of silence. No cameras, no fans, just you, alone. A few people in the audience exhaled softly. And I heard your voice, not out loud but deep, coming from your spirit. You were praying." Denzel's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. "Jesus said to me, he asks me the same thing over and over, late at night, when no one hears him but me." Keanu paused. Helm asks, "Have I done enough? Have I lived for you or for the world?" Denzel's head bowed slightly. His right hand gripped the armrest. Then his left hand slowly moved to cover his mouth. Keanu's tone didn't rise, it didn't perform, it honored. Jesus said, "You've asked him this question with tears, with silence, sometimes just with your breath. And he said to tell you, he hears every time." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. The silence wasn't just respectful, it was reverent. Vanessa Cruz's cue card slid off her lap onto the floor. She didn't pick him up. The camera zoomed in slowly on Denzel's face. His eyes were full, shimmering under the lights, but he didn't blink them away. He just let them stay. "I didn't know what those words meant when I first heard them in the dream," Keanu continued. "I didn't know you prayed that." He looked down for a moment, then back up again. "But when I woke up, I felt it in my chest. Like I had been there beside you, in those rooms, in those quiet moments where you wondered if your platform was God's tool or the world's distraction." Denzel's breathing had changed. It was slower, thicker. Every rise and fall of his chest was heavy with recognition. "Jesus wanted you to know," Keanu said carefully, "that you've always been his, even when you questioned it. Even when the applause felt louder than his whisper, you never stopped being his." Denzel remained completely still, but the emotion on his face spoke louder than any words. His eyes stayed locked on Keanu, not with confusion or disbelief, but with something deeper: recognition, pain, gratitude, and awe. Keanu went on, his voice softer now. Each sentence sounded like it was pulled from a sacred place. "In the dream, Jesus showed me moments throughout your life. Not the public ones, not the movie premieres or interviews, the ones no one ever saw." He paused, his gaze still fixed on Denzel. I saw you sitting in your study, alone. Bible open, but the pages blurred, not because you couldn't read them, but because your mind was heavy. Your heart was tired. Denzel let out a shaky breath. He leaned forward again, hands clasped now, not in performance, but in posture, like prayer. His eyes began to glisten again. Jesus said you would read one verse over and over, Keanu said, but your spirit kept asking something else. You weren't looking for information, you were asking for reassurance. He looked down, then slowly raised his eyes. You were asking, am I doing what you called me to do, or have I drifted from it without even noticing? A quiet sob escaped from someone in the audience. Keanu didn't flinch. Jesus said that question breaks your heart, because it comes from such deep love. He said, Denzel doesn't want to impress the world. He wants to be faithful. He wants to finish well. Denzel now had his hands pressed together near his lips, eyes closed, holding everything in. Keanu continued gently. In the dream, Jesus turned to me and said, he worries that he's lost my voice in the noise. He wonders if I still speak to him the way I used to. A tear rolled down Denzel's cheek. Keanu leaned in, not closer physically, but emotionally. The words came with reverence. Jesus told me, tell him I have never stopped speaking. He just got so used to carrying others, he forgot he could lay it all at my feet. Vanessa wiped her face now, trying not to be seen, but the camera caught her. She didn't care. The burden, Keanu said, the one you've carried alone all these years. He sees it, the pressure to be strong, to say the right thing, to protect your family, to never show weakness. Keanu paused again, letting the moment breathe. But Jesus said, you don't have to carry it anymore. Denzel opened his eyes, and for the first time he nodded, slowly, like a man who had just heard the exact thing he had been waiting for. Maybe for years, maybe his whole life. Keanu saw the nod. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for anyone watching. It was a quiet surrender between a man and the God he'd been faithfully walking with in silence. I asked him why, Keanu continued, why you've had to carry so much of it alone. He paused and looked down for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. And Jesus said, because Denzel is a protector, a watchman. He keeps his heart guarded, not because he's proud, but because he's afraid to let the wrong thing in. He's seen too much, and he wants to shield others from what he's endured. Denzel's lips parted slightly. A sharp inhale. He reached for a tissue from the armrest beside him, but didn't use it. He just held it, like someone who wasn't ready to clean up what was sacred. Ari said, you've been faithful even when it was lonely, that you've turned down applause for integrity, and that the sacrifices you made behind the scenes, he saw every single one. Keanu's voice dropped further, a low tremble underneath. And Jesus said one more thing. He said, tell him I miss him when he's quiet. He doesn't talk to me as much as he used to, but I wait every night, just in case he does. Denzel pressed the tissue to his mouth, trying to keep his breath steady, but it was no use. His shoulders began to shake. The cameras didn't zoom in. The crew didn't cut to a commercial. No one moved, because no one dared interrupt something this real. Keanu continued slowly. You've prayed for clarity, for courage, for confirmation that you're still in His will. And today, right now, He's answering you. Through this dream, through me. Denzel nodded again, this time faster, like something in him had cracked open and the flood was finally reaching the surface. I'm just the messenger, brother, Keanu said gently. But He wants you to know you've done enough. You've walked the walk. You've stayed the course. And He's proud of you. The words broke whatever was left of the wall Denzel had spent a lifetime building. He lowered his face into his hands and wept. The man who had inspired generations with strength, dignity, and power, now bowed under the gentle hand of the one who had always seen him. The silence in the studio turned to stillness, but not the heavy kind. This was release, like the whole room had just watched a soul finally exhale. Keanu sat back, not with triumph, but with peace. The burden had been named, and more importantly, it had been lifted. Keanu sat quietly for a few seconds, allowing the moment to breathe. Denzel's tears hadn't stopped, but there was something different about them now. They weren't heavy with confusion. They were soft with release. When Keanu finally spoke again, his voice was calm but filled with reverence. "Before the dream ended, Jesus showed me something else," he said. "Something not about your career, not about Hollywood, not about any stage or screen." Denzel looked up slowly, wiping under his eyes with the edge of his hand. His breathing had settled some, but he was still open. Completely open now. Keanu nodded, as if seeing that Denzel was ready to hear it. "Showed me your childhood." That simple sentence made Denzel blink hard. The audience stirred, but no one said a word. "You were 9 years old," Keanu continued, his voice steady, "in a small Pentecostal church. It was warm inside. People were singing, and your mother was beside you." Denzel's posture changed instantly. A quiet gasp escaped from his throat. His eyes locked on Keanu's. "That church was in Mount Vernon," Keanu said. "Wooden pews, a low ceiling, the smell of old hymnals and carpet." Denzel's mouth fell slightly open. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But his face said everything. "And there was an altar call," Keanu said. "You didn't plan to respond. You didn't even understand all of what was happening, but something pulled you forward." He paused. "You cried. Hard. You didn't even know why, but you felt him. You felt God so strongly it almost hurt." Denzel closed his eyes. Not to hide, but to see it again. That moment, that memory that he had never told the public, never included in interviews. It had belonged to him and God. And now, somehow, Keanu had walked into it. "You were wearing a light brown jacket. Your shoes didn't fit right that day, they were tight. You kept fidgeting during worship," Keanu added, the details rolling out as if from somewhere beyond him. Backstage, Denzel's wife, Pauletta, sat frozen in front of the monitor. Her hand rose to her chest and tears filled her eyes. She had heard Denzel talk about that night once, just once, long ago, when they were still young and he was still trying to put words to something divine. Now she was hearing it described in exact detail by a man who had never been told. Keanu spoke again. "Jesus showed me how your heart opened that night. How you didn't even know how to pray, but your spirit said yes. And he never forgot that yes. Even when you did." Denzel's lips trembled. The memory had been buried for decades under fame, responsibilities, expectations, and the weight of the world's applause. But now it had been unearthed. Not by force, by love. Keanu stayed quiet for a moment after speaking. The reverence in his tone had bled into the room, touching everyone. The silence wasn't just respectful, it was full of presence. And Denzel wasn't just listening anymore, he was remembering. His last tense, evident. "I saw you at that altar," Keanu continued. "Your knees were on the worn red carpet. You didn't care about the people watching. You weren't thinking about the future. You were just a boy, crying, but not from fear. From something stronger. From awe." Denzel's hand now covered the bottom half of his face. His other hand gripped his knee, trying to hold himself still, but his body was no longer stiff. The tears weren't restrained. They rolled freely now, down the cheeks of a man who had held back for too long. Keanu went on. "Jesus said to me, that's the moment I called him. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't need to. His spirit said yes, and I never forgot that yes. A woman in the second row whispered, "My God," under her breath, unable to contain it. "Mother was beside you," Keanu said. "She didn't push you, she didn't coach you, but she placed her hand on your back when you walked forward. She wept too, not because she understood everything, but because she knew something sacred was happening." Denzel nodded slowly now, his hand still pressed over his lips. Vanessa Cruz, seated across from Keanu, could no longer hold her composure. Her eyes brimmed with tears that had nothing to do with broadcast production or journalistic curiosity. She had interviewed presidents, royalty, and stars. But she had never seen a moment so personal, so untouched by media or agenda. And Pauletta, backstage, silently mouthed the words Keanu had just said. She remembered that moment in the brown wooden church as if it were yesterday. The small congregation, the air thick with incense and heat, the sound of her son's name on someone's prayer list. And that unforgettable moment when the boy beside her stood up without a word and walked toward the altar like he was being pulled by something invisible and holy. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees now. Jesus showed me that day not because it was the most emotional, but because it was the truest. That was the beginning, before the fame, before the awards, before the roles. That was the moment heaven marked you. Denzel stared at him, unmoving. Keanu lowered his voice to a whisper. And he said something else. He said, "He doesn't know that I've built everything else on that moment. Everything that came after, every platform, every open door, it started with that yes." The audience was in tears. The legend in the chair wasn't being honored for his success. He was being remembered by his father for his surrender. Keanu took another breath, slow and reverent, before continuing. "The dream," he said softly. "Jesus showed me a thread, a golden thread that stretched across your whole life. It started at that altar when you were 9, and it moved through every moment since. Every film set, every late-night prayer, every decision to say no when it would have been easier to say yes." Denzel listened with wide eyes, his tears still flowing, but quieter now. His breathing had found a rhythm, slow and deep. The words were cutting through years of silence, not wounding him, but healing him. "This thread," Keanu said, "wasn't just about your career. It was about your heart. The way you've tried to live with integrity, even when it cost you roles. The way you've carried yourself with dignity, even when no one was watching. The way you've given in secret, loved in secret, prayed in secret." He looked down for a moment, then back at Denzel. Jesus said, "I've honored his secret life more than his public one." The studio was still as stone. No lights shifted. No audience member coughed or moved in their seat. Every eye was fixed on Keanu and Denzel. Two men sharing something eternal in front of a world that had expected entertainment, not revelation. And then he said something that hit me in the chest, Keanu continued, his voice trembling now. He said, "Tell him that what he's done in the dark has built more of my kingdom than anything the spotlight ever saw." Denzel closed his eyes, his mouth opened slightly, a soundless prayer on his lips. There was no defense left in him, no persona, just a man hearing God say, "I've been with you the whole time." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Hal showed me nights when you were exhausted but still took time to read scripture. Mornings when you woke up early, not because of a call time, but to get quiet before him. I saw you kneeling on carpet in your bedroom, praying for your children, and I saw him listening." Denzel's shoulders heaved slightly. His hands trembled in his lap. "You may not think anyone's noticed how you've lived, how you've loved your wife, honored your family, stayed faithful to what matters, but heaven has." Behind the stage, Pauletta sat weeping silently. She remembered the sacrifices Denzel made, the weight he carried, the times he stayed up after everyone had gone to bed just to be alone with God. She had seen those moments. But hearing them described with such precision through someone who couldn't possibly know felt like the confirmation she had long prayed her husband would receive. Keanu's voice was quiet but strong. You've given so much, and you've done it quietly. You never asked to be called righteous, but Jesus called you that to me in the dream. He said, "He's one of mine. He belongs to me, and he has always been faithful, even when he couldn't feel me." A long silence followed. Denzel sat upright again, not out of performance, but out of peace. A peace that settled in his bones. His lips moved slowly now, barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said, and everyone in the room knew exactly who he was talking to. Keanu stayed seated, his voice steady but filled with a deep reverence that quieted even the most distracted hearts in the studio. "Jesus showed me something else," he began slowly. "Not the bright lights or the magazine covers. He showed me your obedience." Denzel remained quiet, his eyes fixed on Keanu, his posture soft and open. There was no mask left. The man the world had admired for his strength was now being recognized by heaven for something even greater: his surrender. Keanu continued, "In the dream, I saw decisions, not the kind that make headlines, but the ones that happen when nobody's watching." He looked down briefly, then back at Denzel. "I saw you sitting with a script in your hand. A major offer, big money, prestige, but something in it didn't feel right. You closed the pages, took a breath, and said no. Not because you were afraid, but because your spirit told you it would compromise something sacred." Denzel's expression changed, not in shock, but in memory. Keanu nodded, acknowledging the look in his eyes. "That wasn't just one script," Keanu said. "Jesus showed me several opportunities to climb higher in the world's eyes, but you walked away. You didn't tell anyone why. You just said no and moved on." Denzel exhaled deeply. "Jesus said those were some of your greatest victories," Keanu added, "because they were acts of obedience." The audience was still, hanging on every word. "Jesus told me. He gave up recognition to keep his integrity. He lost contracts to keep his soul. And he never complained." Vanessa Cruz lowered her head. Her cue cards had long since been forgotten. Even the producers backstage, who usually gave signals through earpieces, had gone quiet. "This world measures success in fame," Keanu continued, "but heaven doesn't. Jesus said something that stunned me. He said, 'Those choices matter more than the Oscars.'" The entire audience gasped audibly, not out of disbelief, but because of the truth in it. Denzel bowed his head, not in embarrassment, but in reverence. His tears fell silently, freely, like they had been waiting for years to finally be seen. "You've made choices that cost you," Keanu said, "but heaven sees what you gave up, and Jesus wanted you to know not one of those sacrifices has been forgotten." He paused, then added quietly, "You didn't just say no to roles, you said yes to righteousness." Behind the cameras, a crew member wiped his eyes, another bowed his head. It was no longer a television segment, it was sacred ground. Denzel's hands clasped together now, resting gently in his lap as if in prayer. The stage lights hadn't changed, but everything else had. Keanu leaned forward slightly, speaking with care, not to impress, but to honor. His tone was quiet now, but every word held the weight of heaven behind it. "There was another scene Jesus showed me," Keanu said. "It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, but it moved me more than anything else." He glanced over at Denzel, who looked back with misty eyes. "You were standing outside a small church. It was early morning. You wore a plain coat and a cap pulled low. No one recognized you. You slipped into the back of the sanctuary and sat alone during prayer." Denzel blinked slowly, lips pressing together. "After service, you handed an envelope to the pastor," Keanu continued. "No speech, no publicity, just a blessing. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to keep the food ministry going for months." A few people in the audience wiped their eyes. Jesus said. He gave like a servant, not a celebrity. Denzel shifted, his hand covering his mouth. That church visit hadn't been shared with anyone, not even Pauletta. It was just between him and God. But now it had been brought into the light. And instead of embarrassment, Denzel felt known. Keanu's voice didn't waver. Hell showed me more. Students you've helped, families you've supported, young actors you've mentored when no one else believed in them. You never posted about it. You never let your name be mentioned. You just gave. You just showed up. Vanessa whispered, "My God," as her hands fell to her lap. There was no hosting left to do. She too was just bearing witness. Hell told me something that shook me, Keanu continued. Jesus said, he never gave to be seen. He gave because he remembers being unseen. Denzel lowered his head again, and this time a sob escaped. One that didn't come from sadness, but from the healing that comes when God names the quiet things. The things done in secret. The things never applauded by men, but celebrated by heaven. You've spent a lifetime pouring into others, Keanu said softly, and Jesus said it's your turn now. He's pouring back into you, through this moment, through this message. There was no sound in the room, except the subtle hum of camera equipment and the quiet weeping of hearts breaking open. The applause of the world had once been deafening, but now, in this sacred stillness, something higher was speaking. You've done well, Keanu said. Not because of the movies, but because of the mornings you got up and chose to be faithful, even when you didn't feel it. Because of the nights you gave what little peace you had left to someone else in need. Denzel slowly lifted his head. His face was soaked, but his eyes were alive. This wasn't a man crushed. It was a man being rebuilt, one word of truth at a time. Keanu waited a moment before continuing. He could feel it, the weight of what had just been spoken, the kind of weight that doesn't crush a person but brings them to their knees in holy gratitude. He spoke again, this time more gently than ever. There was one more thing Jesus showed me. Something small, but it hit me harder than all the rest. Denzel looked up, breathing deeply, his expression calm but still raw with emotion. It was a scene I never expected, Keanu said. You were standing at a catering table on a movie set. Nothing special, just a quiet moment between takes. The audience listened in silence. A crew member dropped a tray. It was loud, everyone looked, then turned away. But you walked over. You bent down, helped him gather the food, and whispered something kind. Keanu's voice lowered. He said, "You matter. Don't worry, I've done worse." Denzel closed his eyes. Jesus said, "That moment mattered more to me than the standing ovation he got 2 nights later." Another wave of emotion passed over the room. The contrast between worldly applause and quiet mercy struck deep. Keanu's hands folded in his lap, said, "Your greatness hasn't been measured by how high you've climbed, but by how low you've knelt to lift others." Denzel wiped his face again, this time slower, like he was allowing the words to wash over him. "You've walked through doors meant for kings," Keanu continued, "but you've held them open for those behind you. And Jesus wanted you to know. The kingdom noticed." There was a deep hush in the audience. No one moved. No one blinked. Even the cameras seemed to record more gently, as if reverence could be captured. "You've never needed a spotlight," Keanu said, "because the light has always been inside you." He paused. "And that's why this moment is happening, because heaven wanted to give something back to you. Something private, something sacred." Denzel nodded, slowly, reverently. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't publicity. It was a conversation between a son and his father, delivered through the voice of another son who had simply said yes. Keanu looked at him once more. "Jesus told me, tell him thank you, not for the roles, not for the speeches, for the obedience." Denzel lowered his head, hands clasped, eyes full, And the room, every soul in it, felt the shift. This was no longer a show. It was worship, and no one watching would ever forget it. Keanu's voice was quiet now, slower than before, as if the next words needed to be delivered with gentleness more than force. "There's something else," he said, eyes still on Denzel. "Something that Jesus showed me, something few people ever talk about." The room grew even more still. It's the loneliness that comes with influence. Denzel looked up slightly, his jaw tightening. He didn't speak, but a familiar weight passed through his shoulders. His eyes shimmered again, ready to break. Keanu nodded softly, almost as if in answer to Denzel's silence. "In the dream, Jesus let me feel what you feel when the cameras turn off, when the crowds go home, when the room is quiet but your mind is loud." The emotion that rippled through Denzel's face was undeniable. It wasn't just tears, it was recognition. "You've carried a presence," Keanu continued, "one that inspires people, moves people, but sometimes it isolates you, not because people don't admire you, but because they don't really know you." Denzel closed his eyes slowly, a tear slipping down his cheek. Jesus said, "The very gifts I gave him have sometimes made him feel distant from others, not out of pride, but because people only see the strength, not the soul." Keanu shifted in his seat, keeping his tone measured and low. "You walk into a room and people already have an idea of who you are. They see the awards, the confidence, the composure, but they don't see the ache. They don't see the way you sometimes long for someone to just ask how you're really doing. Not as a star, not as a leader, but as a man." Denzel nodded. A small, slow motion, but filled with pain that didn't need words. "They think you don't need help," Keanu said, "but you've needed it more than anyone would guess. You've needed someone to listen without trying to fix you, someone to see past the surface." Vanessa turned slightly in her seat, her hand still in her lap. Her eyes were glossy again. "And Jesus showed me something," Keanu continued. "He showed me how the platform that's elevated you has often felt like a wall instead of a bridge." The words struck hard. Denzel's chest began to rise and fall faster now, breath catching as though something he had buried long ago was beginning to rise. "You've stood on stages in front of thousands," Keanu said, "but felt completely alone inside." Denzel reached up and wiped his face with the back of his hand, then shook his head as if trying to hold back. But he didn't. The tears came freely, not from weakness, from relief. Keanu continued slowly, giving space between each word like he was walking across holy ground. "Jesus showed me nights when you were surrounded by people, yet you felt invisible. Times when you poured out wisdom, encouragement, even laughter, and then went home to a quiet house and asked yourself, 'Does anyone really know me?'" Denzel breathed out through his nose, steadying himself. He didn't try to hide his tears anymore. He had stopped needing to. Keanu leaned forward again, elbows resting on his knees. "And he showed me something deeper," he said. "There were seasons in your life when even the ones closest to you couldn't reach that place inside you where the silence lived. And you didn't blame them. You didn't push them away. But you carried it. Alone." Denzel nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor now. Jesus said, "He's been surrounded, but still lonely. Admired, but misunderstood. Needed by the world, but rarely asked how he's doing. In the places that matter most." The audience didn't stir, no movement, just silence and the sound of breathing, tears, and reverence. "People see the smile," Keanu said gently. "They see the strength, but they don't see the weight behind it. The way you ask God, even now, 'Is this burden mine to carry forever?'" Denzel looked up at him again, his face soft, broken open, but peaceful. "Jesus told me to tell you," Keanu said carefully, "that you were never meant to carry it alone, not even for a season." He paused. "You've done it beautifully. You've borne it with grace. But you were never alone. The words landed like a lifeline, like fresh water on a man who'd walked miles in a desert without saying a word about how thirsty he really was. "And he said," Keanu added, "tell him I've been beside him in every dressing room, every hotel suite, every quiet ride home, when he wondered if his life still had eternal purpose. I was right there, closer than breath." Denzel's head lowered again, his hands clenched together, not in resistance but in surrender. Behind the stage, Pauletta sat wiping her face, her heart full. She knew this part of Denzel's story more than anyone. She had watched him carry more than anyone should ever have to. And now, to hear it spoken so clearly by someone who had no way of knowing was almost too much. Keanu took one last breath before finishing the thought. Jesus said, "He's not alone. He's never been alone. He never will be." Denzel wept quietly, and in his tears there was something sacred. It wasn't just emotion. It was recognition. It was healing. It was home. Keanu waited. He could see it happening. Denzel wasn't just hearing words anymore. He was receiving them, letting them into the places that had been locked for years. "You've been faithful with your influence," Keanu said softly. "You've stewarded it well. But Jesus wanted you to know the loneliness you felt wasn't a punishment. It was a sacred place, a space where he could whisper when no one else could reach you." Denzel looked up at him, eyes glassy, lips trembling. His hands now rested open on his knees. "Hell said that the isolation was never emptiness," Keanu continued. "It was intimacy, a quiet path where he could walk with you, even when the world thought you were walking alone." The audience remained frozen, captivated, some with tears running down their faces, others silently nodding, recognizing pieces of themselves in the story being told. Keanu spoke again, this time as if quoting directly. Jesus said, "I gave him influence not to elevate him, but to draw others to me through his quiet obedience. And when it made him feel alone, I sat beside him. I watched him pour out his heart, and I smiled. Because he never stopped showing up." Denzel's mouth moved, barely above a whisper. "I never knew if it was enough," he said, voice cracking. "I never knew if he saw any of it." Keanu nodded. "Hell did. Every moment, every ache, every time you gave when you were empty, every night you prayed without words. He saw all of it." Vanessa wiped her face again, visibly shaken. Her eyes were locked on Denzel, but her heart was clearly absorbing every word. Keanu leaned in one final time. "And he told me to say this as plainly as I can," he said. "You were never alone. Not once, not even for a second. My presence has followed you from the moment you first said yes to me, and I will be with you until your very last breath, and beyond." Denzel slowly closed his eyes and nodded. He didn't need to say anything more. His tears spoke louder than any speech. His posture, no longer heavy but surrendered, said everything. And the silence that fell across the studio wasn't awkward. It was sacred. A moment not born from performance, but from presence. The cameras rolled, the world watched. But in that space, only one voice mattered. And it wasn't Keanu's. It was the voice of God reminding his son, "You were never alone." Keanu sat still for a moment after the last words fell. Denzel was breathing deeper now, not just in grief, but in rest. Something had lifted. Something sacred. And, just as it seemed the silence might settle permanently, Keanu leaned forward again. "There was more," he said softly. "More that Jesus showed me." Denzel looked up again, weary but open. His hands were still resting open in his lap, the posture of a man who wasn't resisting anymore, only receiving. "In the dream," Keanu continued, "he showed me your family." Denzel's lips tightened slightly, not in discomfort, but in recognition. "Your children," Keanu said, "not just their names or their faces. He showed me your heart for them, the way you carry them in your spirit, Every day, every hour. Denzel nodded slowly, a father's nod, one filled with weight. Jesus said, "You've prayed prayers that haven't been spoken out loud, words that never made it into the air but came straight from your soul." He called them the Father's prayers. Keanu paused, his voice thickened. "And he told me to tell you, those prayers were never wasted, not one." The words struck deeply. "You've worried," Keanu said gently, "that your fame would make their walk harder, that your shadow might block their view of the light. You've asked him, how do I raise them to know you when they've seen the world from behind the curtain?" Denzel's shoulders tensed, then dropped. Keanu's eyes were locked onto his. Haley said, "Even when you didn't have the right words, your example planted seeds, even in moments when you doubted yourself." The camera caught Vanessa pressing a hand to her heart now. "Jesus showed me a moment," Keanu continued. "I saw you walk into one of their bedrooms. Your son. He was already asleep. It was late. You were in your robe. You stood by the door for a second, unsure if you should bother him, but then you walked to the edge of the bed and placed your hand on his shoulder." Denzel's face changed instantly. The memory hit him like a gust of wind. His lips parted, his eyes filled again. "You prayed over him," Keanu said. "Not a long speech, just a whisper, just a name, just a cry." Behind the curtain, Pauletta gasped. She raised her hand to her mouth and wept quietly, because it was real, because it had happened exactly that way, and no one, not even their closest friends, had ever known. Keanu took a slow breath, allowing the room to hold the weight of that memory. "I saw your hand resting on his shoulder," he said softly. "You didn't speak much. You just whispered his name, and then you said, 'God, protect him. Don't let him lose you in this world.'" Denzel's chest rose sharply. He turned his face slightly, trying to hold himself together, but his hand trembled. "And you wept," Keanu added. "You wept in silence, standing alone in that room, because you didn't know if you were doing enough." Denzel covered his mouth, emotion overtaking him. His other hand reached for the arm of the chair, steadying himself. "Jesus said to tell you," Keanu continued. "He saw that moment, that night, that tear, and he said, that was the holiest moment of the year. Not the interviews, not the stages. That moment in your son's room, when you asked me to carry him, that was worship." Behind the scenes, Pauletta wept openly now. She remembered that night. She had come out of their bedroom to find Denzel standing still in the hallway, wiping his eyes, robe folded tightly around him. He never spoke about it afterward. But she had known. And now, here it was, described in detail on live television by a man who had never stepped foot in their home. Keanu's voice cracked slightly now, the emotion catching up to him. "Jesus told me, he's worried they're not listening, that they're watching the world and not me. But tell him, seeds grow in silence, and his seeds are alive. They've taken root." Denzel slowly lifted his head again, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched as he tried to stay composed. But there was no need anymore. The truth had already been spoken. The Father had already answered. "You've asked him," Keanu said, "if the pressure of who you are has made their walk harder, if they're carrying your name more than they're carrying his. And Jesus told me to tell you this." He paused, then continued with clarity. "Dead. They are not lost. They are covered. They are marked. And I will finish what I started in them because of their Father's faith." Denzel blinked hard. Then a single sob escaped. Keanu let the moment breathe. "You haven't done it perfectly," he said, "but you've done it faithfully. You've asked the questions no one hears. How do I keep them grounded? How do I raise them in truth when the world is louder than ever? And every time, Jesus answered you, even if you didn't hear it then." Vanessa was crying now. She didn't try to hide it. "Jesus said something else," Keanu added quietly. The way he fathers is the way he prays. Steady, quiet, unrecognized by man, but known in heaven. Denzel wiped his face again, now with both hands, overwhelmed by the clarity, the intimacy, the mercy in every sentence. "You've loved them well," Keanu said, "and he sees that. You didn't raise them by performance, you raised them by presence, and that's what lasts." There was a stillness in the studio now that felt like peace. Not heavy, not sorrowful, just holy. Keanu gave the moment room to breathe before continuing, his voice quiet but steady again. "There was one more thing Jesus showed me," he said. "Not just about you as a father to your children, but about you as a father to a generation." Denzel looked up slowly. His eyes met Keanu's, weary but open, softened by everything that had already been said. "You may not realize it," Keanu continued, "but your life has been fathering more than just your family. It's been fathering men, artists, believers, young people who never had someone to show them what integrity looks like under pressure." Denzel listened, his breathing slower now, grounded. Jesus said, "I gave him visibility so he could show them what quiet strength looks like, what righteousness without self-promotion looks like, what grace under pressure looks like." Keanu leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and he said, "You've been a covering for many without even realizing it. That the way you've lived, when no one was clapping, when no one was watching, has created safety for people who didn't know how to walk in this world." The camera panned slowly across the audience. Several young men were visibly emotional, some wiping tears, others bowing their heads. "You taught people how to carry greatness without arrogance," Keanu said, "how to walk in honor without needing applause, and how to love your children fiercely even while leading others." Denzel's shoulders relaxed. For the first time since the moment began, he looked not just reflective, but free. "And Jesus told me to say this last part clearly," Keanu said. "You've done enough. You've planted, you've covered, you've carried. Now I will water what you've sown, and the harvest will come." A hush fell over the entire studio. Denzel nodded slowly, his hands unclenched, his tears slowed, but they didn't stop. "You were never just building a legacy," Keanu added. "You were building a shelter." The room was completely still now, wrapped in the quiet awe of what had just been spoken. "Your fatherhood," Keanu said, "wasn't just for your house. It was for the world." And in that moment, Denzel Washington didn't look like a movie star or a legend or a public figure. He looked like what he had always been beneath it all. A father, a faithful son, a vessel, and now, a man who finally knew that God had seen every quiet seed he'd planted. For a long moment, Keanu remained quiet. The studio was still, and the atmosphere rested in a place of peace and reverence. Denzel had received so much, and the weight of it all hung softly in the air. But as Keanu straightened slightly in his seat, his eyes dimmed, not with sorrow, but reflection. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice quieter now, not as a messenger, but as a man. "It's not about the dream. Not entirely. It's about me." Denzel looked up at him gently, sensing the shift. Keanu wasn't delivering a message now. He was stepping into something personal. "I never thought I'd be the one carrying a message like this," Keanu said. "I've spent most of my life avoiding stages like this. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't feel worthy." He paused for a beat, and the studio listened more intently. "I've lived a quiet life, mostly. You know, people call it mysterious, private. But the truth is, I've lived it quiet. Because I've lived it in pain." Denzel leaned slightly forward now, listening with the same reverence he had just been shown. Keanu's voice caught a little. "I lost my daughter before she was ever born. I lost her mother not long after. And for a while, I lost myself." The audience was silent, breath held as Keanu continued. I didn't know how to make sense of the grief. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just went quiet. I kept working. I kept showing up. But inside I was trying to figure out if anything I did really mattered. He breathed slowly, letting the weight of the truth rest. I would go home after work and sit in silence, sometimes for hours. No TV, no phone, just stillness. And questions. Keanu looked over at Denzel again. I've been searching for truth for a long time, man. Not a philosophy, not a slogan, but real truth. Something eternal. He swallowed hard, then looked back toward the audience. And then this dream happened. And I didn't know what to do with it. His eyes drifted down briefly. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after I had it. Not because I was afraid, but because the weight of it wouldn't let me rest. It felt like something had been placed in my hands. Something alive. Something I wasn't allowed to ignore. Denzel nodded gently. Keanu continued. I asked myself over and over, why me? Why would Jesus give this to me? I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher. I'm just an actor who's made a lot of mistakes and asked a lot of questions. His voice cracked slightly. But the answer I kept hearing wasn't complicated. It was just this. You're listening. He paused again. And then Jesus said, tell Denzel, I am proud of him. Keanu's words hung in the air like something living. Heavy, sacred, undeniable. He sat quietly for a moment, letting the silence say what words could not. His voice, when it returned, was slower and full of something that sounded like reverence. I almost didn't say it, Keanu admitted. I almost kept it to myself, because honestly, I didn't think I had the right. I didn't think I had the authority to speak on behalf of God to someone like you, Denzel. Denzel shook his head gently, as if to say, you do. But Keanu continued. I thought about how I've spent most of my life in the margins of faith. I've studied philosophy, dabbled in spirituality. I've admired Jesus from afar. But I've never stood in a church and said, here I am, Lord, send me. He took a slow breath, voice thick with emotion. But this dream? It changed something in me. Not just because it was vivid, but because it was full of love, like nothing I've ever felt. Keanu leaned forward now, hands clasped loosely between his knees. When Jesus said, tell Denzel I'm proud of him, I felt it. I felt the weight of those words in my chest, like he was trusting me with something fragile, something holy. He looked up, locking eyes with Denzel. And I realized it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my worthiness. It wasn't about my story. It was about obedience. It was about being willing to deliver a message that wasn't mine to begin with. Denzel's eyes shone again. He nodded, lips pressed tightly together, as if holding back another wave of tears. I think I finally understood what faith really is, Keanu said. It's not knowing all the answers. It's not having the perfect past. It's not even being fearless. He paused. It's saying yes when God asks you to move. The audience was still, every soul hanging on every word. I've spent a long time trying to make sense of pain, Keanu continued, trying to understand why life takes what it does, why love disappears, why peace is so hard to hold on to. His voice dropped, quiet and raw, and then this dream came. And I saw him, Jesus, not like an idea, not like a distant figure, but close, real, unshakable. Keanu's voice cracked again. And he wasn't angry, he wasn't disappointed, he wasn't counting my failures. He just looked at me with this love that didn't ask for anything in return. A tear slid down Keanu's cheek. I didn't feel worthy of it, he admitted. I still don't, but I couldn't ignore it, and I couldn't forget what he said. He looked over at Denzel again. Tell Denzel, Keanu repeated, I am proud of him. He let the words settle in the room like a benediction, like a ribbon tying everything together. I don't know what comes next for me, Keanu said. I don't know what God wants to do through my life, but I know this. When He speaks, you listen. And when He trusts you with someone else's breakthrough, you speak. Denzel reached across the space between them and gently touched Keanu's hand. It wasn't just a gesture of thanks. It was a recognition. A brotherhood formed not by shared profession, but by divine purpose. You were the right one, Denzel whispered. Keanu nodded once. I'd just said yes. And in that moment, the roles reversed. The messenger was no longer just delivering healing. He was receiving it too. Keanu remained still for a few moments, letting the sacredness of what had just happened settle. The studio had become something else entirely. Not a set, not a show, something closer to sanctuary. Everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something far beyond a conversation. It had become a divine moment in real time. Then Keanu took a breath and shifted in his seat. There's one last thing I need to share, he said, his voice lower now, heavier with something holy. It's the part of the dream that felt the most urgent, and it's the part that scared me the most. Denzel looked up at him again, his face calm but open, almost childlike now. In the final part of the dream, Keanu continued, Jesus showed me your future. The air shifted. Not just events, Keanu said, but impact, influence, fruit. He sat forward, his hands resting together in front of him. The intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. I saw projects you haven't even imagined yet. I saw stories that don't exist in script form yet. I saw you standing in places you've never stood, but places that were waiting for you. Denzel's brow furrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in quiet awe. I saw nations, Keanu said. I saw your voice being used in places that aren't on your radar, languages being translated, testimonies being shared. The audience remained perfectly still. No whispering, no movement. Just the raw, collective silence of people sensing something divine unfolding. And I heard Jesus say, tell him, he's not done. Keanu paused and looked Denzel squarely in the eye. You're not done, he said. Your best work is ahead of you. Denzel's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, but in release, as if something heavy that he had been carrying for decades had suddenly been taken off his back. His hands opened naturally on his lap, his palms facing upward, as if surrendering years of doubt in one single posture. I saw lives being changed, Keanu said. Not just entertained, healed, delivered, awakened. I saw young people crying in theaters, not because the performance moved them, but because the presence of God hit them while watching something you created. A sob escaped from someone in the front row. And Jesus told me, he doesn't realize the seed of eternity I've placed in his creative gift. He thought it was about craft, but it's about calling. Denzel closed his eyes again, tears now streaming silently down his face. His lips moved, barely audible. Thank you, Lord. Keanu kept speaking. There are films coming, he said, that you haven't even thought of yet. Ideas that are going to hit you like lightning. Stories that will seem too big, too bold, but they will carry my anointing. Ah, that's what he said. My anointing. Behind the camera, one of the crew members, usually the most skeptical of the team, wiped his eyes and whispered, "This is real." Keanu remained steady, his voice unwavering now, strengthened by what felt like divine momentum. The room around him wasn't just listening, it was leaning in, breath held, hearts wide open. Jesus showed me a map, Keanu said slowly. Not a physical one, but a map of hearts. I saw dots of light spreading across the world, from cities to villages, from studios to underground churches. And in the center of it, there was a name. He looked directly at Denzel. Your name. Denzel's mouth parted slightly. His chest rose and fell deeply, as if his spirit was drinking in something it had long thirsted for. Jesus said, "He thinks his legacy is already behind him, but I've only just begun." A stunned murmur moved through the audience, not disruption, but awe. Keanu pressed forward gently. Hem said, "Tell him his voice will echo in halls where his feet will never walk. Tell him his choices, his obedience, have built a path that others will follow, even long after he's gone." Denzel leaned back now, overwhelmed. His hands still rested open on his knees, but his face told the story of a man who had just seen a glimpse of what his obedience had birthed in eternity. "You've spent your life delivering lines," Keanu said, his voice breaking just slightly. "But now God is giving you a line to deliver to the world. One not written in a script, but written in fire." He paused, allowing the words to fall like rain on parched ground. "There's a film you're going to make," he continued. "I don't know the title, I don't know the year, but I saw the result. I saw people watching it in hospital beds, in prison cells, in countries that censor faith, and I saw them cry, not because of the cinematography, but because their hearts were turning toward God." Denzel's tears now flowed freely. Jesus said, "This next chapter will not be about building a career. It will be about building altars." Gasps came from several seats. Even the technical crew, hardened by years in the entertainment industry, sat still, weeping. "And," he said, Keanu added softly, "tell him I've saved his most anointed work for the final stretch, because now he can carry it." Denzel whispered yes, under his breath. Just one word, but it was enough. It was agreement. It was surrender. Keanu's voice softened. "You were born to be a prophet in the language of film, not to entertain but to awaken, to disturb what needs disturbing, to comfort what needs comforting, and to point people back to the one who gave you the gift in the first place." He looked out at the audience now, not just at Denzel. "And you haven't missed it. Not one moment. Not one assignment." Jesus said, "Even the delays were divine." Denzel bowed his head. Behind the curtain, Pauletta had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming. She had prayed for her husband's peace for years, and now she was watching God deliver it, publicly, undeniably, prophetically. Keanu took a final breath and said the words that would echo across the internet within hours. "Your best work is not behind you, Denzel. It's ahead, and the world doesn't even know what's coming." The studio fell into silence again. Not heavy, not solemn, just full of holy awe. Denzel slowly raised his head, his face wet with tears and shining with peace. And for the first time in a long time, he looked lighter, because now he believed it too. Keanu took a deep breath, his gaze fixed gently on Denzel. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, yet somehow it filled every corner of the studio. "There's one more thing Jesus let me hear," he said. "Not just see, but hear." Denzel sat up slightly, eyes narrowing with cautious anticipation. "In the dream," Keanu continued, "he let me hear your prayers." At those words, Denzel's entire expression shifted, his eyes widened slightly, not in disbelief, but in holy fear, the kind that comes when you know something sacred is being touched. "David, you weren't rehearsed, they weren't polished," Keanu said, his voice gentle. "They were raw, quiet, late-night prayers." Denzel's chest rose again. His breathing began to thicken. "I'd heard you whispering in the dark," Keanu said. "No script, no performance, just a man alone with God." A tear slid down Denzel's cheek, slow and silent. Keanu didn't stop. "I heard one prayer that gripped me," he said. "You said, 'God, am I still on your path?'" The words hit like thunder. Denzel inhaled sharply and let out a long breath through his nose, lips trembling. "You asked him if you'd wandered too far, if maybe the world had gotten too loud, if the spotlight had swallowed the still, small voice." Keanu's own eyes were now filled with tears. His hands trembled slightly as he continued. You said, I don't want to build what you didn't tell me to build. I don't want to stand where you never asked me to stand. Denzel lowered his head again, this time resting it in his hand. And then there was another prayer, Keanu said, even quieter than the first. The room was still, the air thick with the presence of something greater than any human voice. You said, Am I too far gone to be used again? A soft cry broke from Denzel's throat. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. The kind that comes from deep places only God can reach. Keanu paused for a long moment, letting the weight of the moment land. And Jesus answered, he said, voice now breaking. I said, Tell him, he never left my sight. The room went completely silent again. Not just still, but silent, in a way that felt spiritual, like heaven itself had leaned closer to listen. You never left, Keanu repeated, voice softer now. You never slipped from his hands. You never fell out of his grace. You were never forgotten, not once. Denzel's shoulders shook now, his chest rising in waves. His hands were pressed to his face. There was no shame, no resistance, but just release. A beautiful breaking, a breaking that made space for healing. Keanu gave Denzel space, letting the silence stretch as far as it needed. He could feel what was happening, not just emotionally but spiritually. This wasn't about storytelling anymore. It was about returning. After a moment, Keanu's voice returned, low and filled with reverence. Jesus showed me that you've never stopped talking to him, even when it didn't feel like a conversation. He leaned in slightly, eyes fixed on Denzel with kindness. You've whispered prayers into pillows. You've spoken into the air when no one else was awake. You've questioned your steps, your silence, your influence. And yet, you kept talking. Denzel lifted his head again. His face was soaked with tears, but his eyes were sharper now. Awake in a way that felt brand new. Jesus told me, Keanu said, that he listens more to the prayers you've prayed in doubt than the ones you've spoken in confidence. Because they're real. They're from the deepest part of you. The audience was still. No one moved. A quiet weeping had started in pockets around the room. Some in the crew, others in the seats. Even Vanessa had long since abandoned her professional posture. She sat now with both hands folded in front of her mouth, tears gently sliding down her cheeks. Keanu pressed on. Let me hear one prayer in particular, he said. It wasn't long, it wasn't loud, but it pierced through me when I heard it in the dream. He paused. You were sitting in your car, alone. One hand on the wheel, another hand over your eyes, and you said, Lord, if you're still with me, I'd need you to show me. I need to know you're still here. Denzel gasped softly. That prayer wasn't just real. It was recent. It was one he had prayed less than 6 months ago. He hadn't told a soul, not Pauletta, not his pastor, no one. Keanu didn't know that, but Jesus did. And he told me to tell you, Keanu said gently. That moment in the car, I was sitting right beside you. I didn't just hear you. I was holding you. Denzel's face fell into his hands again, not from despair, but from the weight of being known so intimately. Keanu kept going, slowly and carefully. Jesus said, He's always been mine, even in silence, even in fear, even when he didn't feel worthy. He never stopped being mine. The words melted through every wall. You haven't prayed wrong, Keanu said. You haven't wandered too far. And your doubts haven't disqualified you. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through it. Jesus said, He asks me if I still have a purpose for him. But what he doesn't know is he's been walking in that purpose even during the questions, even in the fog, even in the wilderness. He has never left. My plan. The studio remained engulfed in that stillness, a kind of silence that felt like breath being held by heaven. Denzel slowly dropped his hands from his face. His posture wasn't slumped anymore. It was upright, solid, renewed. "You asked if you're still on his path," Keanu said softly. "He told me to tell you, you never left it." That was the moment something shifted. Not just in the air, but in Denzel's spirit. He sat back in his chair with a kind of peace that felt unfamiliar because it had been so long since he had felt it. A peace that settled like a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I don't know why God chose me to say it," Keanu whispered, "but I know He wanted you to hear it. Every private prayer you thought vanished into the dark, they were caught, every word." Denzel nodded, eyes closed, hands resting gently in his lap. He didn't have to say a thing. His heart had heard everything it needed. Keanu sat back slightly, the last words still resonating through the atmosphere. Denzel looked like a man who had just finished weeping through a storm and found peace on the other side. His shoulders were lowered, his chest rising slower. His hands calm now, resting open on his knees. But Keanu wasn't finished. He turned his body slightly toward the camera, not dramatically, but purposefully. His voice softened again, not in volume, but in tone, like someone about to speak directly into someone's soul. "And there's someone else Jesus asked me to speak to," Keanu said. He paused for a beat. "Pauletta." Denzel immediately turned toward him, then instinctively toward the camera, as if knowing who the words were meant for. The moment her name was spoken, he placed his hand over his face, already overcome. Keanu pressed on gently. "Jesus showed me your wife's strength." His voice cracked just slightly, and his eyes glistened. "More specifically," Joel murmured, he said, "she's been his compass when he was lost, his covering when he was exposed, and his steady hand when the world was shaking under his feet." Behind the curtain, Pauletta froze, both hands flying to her mouth. Tears poured instantly down her cheeks, and a sound, half gasp, half cry, escaped from deep within her. Keanu continued, slowly and with reverence. "Back," he said, "she's the reason you didn't quit. The reason you didn't give in to the doubt. The reason you kept praying, even when you felt unheard." Denzel shook his head in disbelief, hands still covering his eyes, unable to contain the depth of emotion those words evoked. "And he told me," Keanu said, "that she has prayed over you when you didn't even know it. That she has stood in the gap when your strength was low. That she has carried you with her faith when your own felt too tired to stand." Vanessa Cruz, seated just a few feet away, audibly sobbed now, her hand shaking as she gripped the edge of her chair. She wasn't just hosting anymore. She was witnessing. "She's been your anchor," Keanu said gently. "The storm was never meant to take you down, because she was planted for that very season." Denzel dropped his hand now, letting his face be seen, wet with tears, red from emotion, but more peaceful than he had been all morning. He nodded slowly, a deep and broken kind of agreement. "She never asked to be seen," Keanu continued, "but heaven saw her. Jesus said, she didn't need the world to applaud her. She lived for my approval, and she has it." Pauletta collapsed into a chair backstage, unable to stand under the weight of the moment. No spotlight had ever touched what Keanu was describing. These were years of quiet intercession, silent strength, gentle resilience, all now being honored before the world. Keanu glanced once more toward the camera. "She must love you like Christ loves his church," he said. "Not perfectly, but sacrificially, consistently, even when the applause faded and the cameras turned away." Denzel placed both hands over his heart, lips trembling again, the tears still coming. Denzel finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of embarrassment and something deeper. Not shame, not regret, but awe. The kind of awe a man feels when he realizes he's been seen, really seen, by something far greater than himself. Keanu didn't move. He didn't press. He simply let the moment breathe. "I'm not trying to expose anything," Keanu said softly. I just want to honor what Jesus showed me. Your marriage, it's been an anchor." That word, anchor, landed with force. Denzel's hand lowered slightly, as if the word itself had loosened something in his chest. For years, his marriage had been his refuge and his battlefield. Peta had stood by him when the camera stopped rolling, when the roles dried up, when the whispers in his own mind turned cruel and loud. They had seen money come and go, faith rise and fall, fame swell and then retreat, like a tide that was never theirs to control. But through it all, Peta had remained steady, firm, not without tears, not without cracks, but solid. "Real," Keanu continued, his voice still calm. "She prays for you more than you know," he said. "Even when you pull away, even when you're angry, even when you want to run." Denzel blinked hard. He hadn't told anyone that, not even close friends. There had been seasons when he'd felt so overwhelmed by the pressure to be perfect, the Christian role model, the faithful man, the strong husband, that he had emotionally withdrawn. He would sit in the same room as Peta and feel 100 miles away. And yet, she never stopped interceding for him, quietly, daily, like the tide, always returning. Keanu didn't explain how he knew. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked directly into the camera. "And to any husband watching this," he said, "who feels lost, who feels like he's failed too many times, Jesus doesn't just see you. He sees your wife too. The prayers she cries into a pillow, the nights she waits up hoping for your heart to soften. He hears her, and he's honoring her through you." A hush settled over the room. The audience, the crew, the producers in the booth. No one moved. Even those who weren't religious felt the weight of the words. This wasn't performance. This wasn't a segment. It was sacred. Denzel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief, dabbing at his eyes. He cleared his throat but didn't speak. Not yet. He was still in it. Still processing. Peta had told him that Jesus loved him 1,000 times. But hearing those same truths, specific, personal truths, from a man like Keanu, in a moment like this, felt like something else entirely. Like confirmation. Like grace in flesh and blood. The host, sitting to the side, seemed unsure of what to do. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She realized this was not her moment to fill. Sometimes silence is the holiest thing in the world. Keanu looked back at Denzel and gave a small nod. "Jesus is restoring you, Denzel, but he's also restoring your marriage. Not because you deserve it, but because she asked him to." That line hit like thunder. Not punishment, not accusation, just truth. And in that truth, there was mercy. Denzel lowered his head again, but this time it wasn't to hide. It was reverence, a surrender, a holy pause. The tears weren't shame now, they were gratitude. Quietly, he mouthed something only Peta would understand later. "Thank you." And somewhere backstage, she felt it in her soul. Keanu took a deep breath. You could see it in the way his chest rose slightly, the kind of breath someone takes before stepping into water that's deeper than they've ever swum. But he wasn't nervous. He was grounded, calm, almost weightless in his clarity. "There's one more thing," he said. The lights dimmed slightly. It wasn't intentional, no one had touched a switch, but even the production crew watching through the glass held still. There was an electricity in the air, yet no noise, no sound of movement, no whispers, just the sound of breath drawn and held. "In the dream," Keanu said slowly, "after Jesus showed me your daughter, Denzel, and your marriage," he turned toward me, and he said, Keanu looked directly into the lens, "The world will see this moment, because My people need to know I still speak. A single exhale escaped the room, and then complete stillness again. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He repeated it, his voice like the softest bell echoing in a cathedral. Still speaks. Then he paused. Still sees. Another pause, longer this time. The room felt suspended in time. Hale still calls Pep. Descriptions of the conversation continued. No one clapped. No one shouted. There wasn't a single cough, a shift, a throat clear. Just reverent silence. Even in the control room, the director had frozen mid-instruction, headset still pressed to his ear, mouth open. The camera operators didn't move. The stage manager, who had once waved his arms wildly, now stood completely still, his eyes glassy. Keanu stood in the center of it all, not commanding attention, but creating space for something else to enter. A presence. A weight that wasn't oppressive, but holy. Denzel sat with his hands in his lap, completely still, tears still drying at the corners of his eyes. But his body posture had changed. He wasn't just humbled now. He was listening, with his spirit. Keanu didn't rush forward. He didn't embellish the moment or try to make it palatable. He simply stood in that silence, letting the words settle, like morning fog across a quiet field. For those watching live on TV, something strange was happening in homes across the country. At least the man in Chicago turned down the volume on his TV instinctively, only to realize it was already silent. But he still felt something loud in his chest. A mother in South Carolina watching with her children suddenly reached for her daughter's hand without knowing why. An inmate in Arizona, watching from a prison television, mouthed the words, "He still sees," and began to weep openly. A teenager in Tokyo, who had stumbled onto the clip online with English subtitles, froze with his thumb hovering over the skip button, then let it fall. It wasn't just a moment on set, it had already moved beyond it. Keanu stepped forward slightly, his hands open at his sides. "This moment," he said quietly, "is not about celebrity. It's not about me, or Denzel, or this studio. It's about all of us." He looked around the room now, not just at the camera, but at everyone, the crew, the staff, the security, the host. He even turned toward the audience. "Still speaks, but are we still listening?" The words hung there like incense, invisible but thick with presence. "Moreau still speaks, but are we still listening?" Keanu let it land. He didn't try to interpret it. He didn't try to lead the room into applause or reaction. That wasn't his job. His role was only to deliver the message, not manage the outcome. Still, the atmosphere had changed, and now it was Denzel who slowly rose from his seat. His face was calm, but his eyes were wet. The proud posture he often carried as a leading man was replaced by something quieter, something freer. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Keanu. The two of them weren't actors in this moment. They were brothers. Denzel spoke, but barely above a whisper. "He's right, he still speaks, and I had forgotten how to listen." His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from release. "I've preached. I've quoted scripture. I've tried to be a light. But somewhere along the way, I got busy. I got tired, and I let the noise drown out the voice." He paused, searching for the right words, but God never stopped speaking. He just waited for me to be still again. People in the audience were weeping, not from sadness, from recognition, from the aching realization that they too had drowned out the voice of the one who never stopped calling. One of the producers backstage wiped her face with her sleeve. She hadn't cried in years, not even at her father's funeral. But something about this, about the honesty, the gentleness, the divine precision of it all, had cracked something open in her. Back in the studio, Keanu nodded once. It wasn't approval, it was alignment. "This moment is not scripted," he said softly. "And that's why it's sacred." He turned again to the camera. "To every person watching, Jesus sees you. Right now. He knows what you're hiding, what you're carrying, what you're pretending not to feel. His voice didn't rise. It sank lower, more intimate. He's not angry with you. He's calling you. Not to religion, not to a building, to himself. You could hear soft crying now. Not loud sobs, but the kind that come from people who've been holding in sorrow, shame, or hunger for too long. The host, still seated off to the side, placed a hand over her mouth. She had hosted thousands of segments in her career, with politicians, CEOs, actors, musicians, even a few faith leaders. But nothing had ever silenced her like this. Keanu spoke one final line. This moment was never meant to be a performance. It was a reminder. He still speaks. The silence afterward was not empty. It was full. And across the world, in homes, prisons, airports, nursing homes, apartments, and YouTube clips shared on phones, people didn't scroll away. They paused. They leaned in. They remembered something they didn't know they had forgotten. And for a few sacred seconds, the world listened. Denzel didn't move right away. He stood beside Keanu in total stillness, his breathing slow, his hands loose by his sides. It was as if time itself had taken a knee, waiting for him to decide what came next. There was no pressure, no cues, just a still, holy space waiting to be filled by something real. Then, without a word, Denzel turned to face Keanu fully. Their eyes met, and in that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just two actors standing in a studio. This was something ancient, playing out in real time. Two men, both broken in their own ways, standing before the world, completely unguarded. Denzel took one step forward, then another, and then he crossed the remaining space between them, not with drama, but with gravity. Keanu didn't flinch or brace. He stood rooted, ready. Denzel reached out and wrapped his arms around him. It wasn't a staged hug. It wasn't polite. It wasn't shallow. It was fierce. It was long. It was holy. Keanu's arms came around him too, pulling him in. They held each other like brothers who had both just come through a war. No words passed between them, no need for explanation. The language of that embrace said everything. Thank you. I see you. I forgive you. We're not alone. The room didn't erupt in applause. That would have broken the spell. Instead, something deeper happened. People stood, not all at once, but slowly, respectfully. From the back of the audience to the front row, people began to rise to their feet in silence, not in celebration, in awe. The kind of awe that comes when you know you've just witnessed something eternal. No one wanted to interrupt it, not even the host. She stood too, tears quietly falling down her cheeks, hands pressed together in front of her chest. The embrace continued. What made it powerful wasn't just that it lasted so long. It was that neither man rushed it. Keanu leaned his head slightly against Denzel's shoulder, and Denzel closed his eyes for a few seconds, not to block anything out, but to let it all in. Greed, relief, gratitude, redemption. There are moments when time seems to forget its job, when clocks stop mattering. This was one of those moments. Backstage, the network team was scrambling, not in panic, but in wonder. A segment that was supposed to be 6 minutes had now passed 20. Ratings metrics were blinking red with record-breaking numbers. Viewers weren't just staying, they were inviting others. People were texting their spouses, calling their moms, posting clips online in real time with captions like, "You need to see this," and "Something just happened on TV," and "I can't stop crying." But inside the studio, no one cared about that. It wasn't about television anymore. It was about two men being made whole, not by each other, but through each other. The audience didn't sit back down. They couldn't. It felt like church. It felt like healing. It felt like the kind of moment you never want to forget, because it doesn't just change the room, it changes you. When Denzel finally stepped back, his hand stayed on Keanu's shoulders for a moment longer. His face was different now, softer, lighter, as if a weight that had lived behind his eyes for years had been lifted. Keanu looked at him with the same steadiness, eyes filled with warmth and understanding. Denzel nodded once, and Keanu returned the nod. They didn't need to speak. The audience remained on their feet, not in applause, but in stillness. Many had their hands over their hearts. Others simply stared ahead, blinking back tears. No one wanted to break the spell. From the control booth above, a producer finally whispered, "We're witnessing history." Someone else responded, "No, we're witnessing heaven touch earth." On the stage, Keanu finally turned slightly toward the crowd. He didn't speak a sermon. He didn't preach. He simply opened his arms wide, not as a performance, but as an invitation. Denzel stepped to his side, and without cue, the studio audience slowly moved forward, not to swarm them, but to receive. Some raised their hands. Some bowed their heads. Some quietly whispered prayers they hadn't spoken in years. It wasn't chaos, it was reverence, like walking into a sacred room where grief and glory are both welcome. One young woman near the front began to sob. Her friend gently placed a hand on her back and wept with her. A man in his 60s, who had once been a pastor but hadn't set foot in a church since his divorce, whispered, "God, I miss you." A teenage boy with headphones still hanging around his neck slowly knelt in the aisle, not because anyone told him to, but because his heart couldn't stay standing anymore. In that moment, the embrace between Keanu and Denzel had become something larger. It wasn't just about two men, it was about a generation, a people, a nation, hungry for something deeper than performance, desperate for truth that didn't come with a price tag. Backstage, the host's assistant quietly canceled the next guest. The makeup artist who had been on standby simply put down her brush and wiped her eyes. No one wanted to move the moment forward. Because there are rare times in life when the moment is enough. Keanu finally lowered his arms. But the message remained. A camera slowly zoomed out, catching the wide view. The two men, the tearful crowd, the lights that now seemed warmer somehow. This wasn't television anymore. It was testimony. Keanu looked down briefly, almost as if to remind himself that he was still standing on a stage. But then he looked up again. Not at Denzel this time, not even at the crowd. He looked just above them, into a space unseen. And he whispered with quiet conviction, "Thank you." The lights didn't flash. The music didn't swell. But something eternal had been said, and something eternal had been healed. And no one in that room, or watching from around the world, would ever forget it. Vanessa Cruz had been silent the entire time. Her hands had remained folded tightly in her lap. Her polished image, her professional posture, all of it had melted away as she watched the scene unfold between Keanu and Denzel. She wasn't a skeptic, but she wasn't quite a believer either, not lately. Vanessa had grown up in church. Her mother prayed with a fervor that scared her sometimes. Her father quoted the Bible like it was oxygen. But life had chipped away at her faith over time. She had seen too much tragedy, too much hypocrisy. And in the past few years, she had quietly stepped back from anything that sounded like religion. But this, what she had just witnessed, it didn't feel like religion. It felt like truth. She had tried to keep her emotions in check. After all, she was still hosting, still live, still on camera. But now, as the studio settled into a hush following Keanu's embrace with Denzel, all eyes turned toward her. The cameras instinctively cut to her face. She opened her mouth to speak, and couldn't. Her lips trembled, her voice caught in her throat. She blinked, trying to find the script in her teleprompter, as if that might save her from what was happening inside her. Then she looked up, at Keanu, at Denzel, at the audience still on their feet, some weeping quietly, others frozen in awe. And something in her broke. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I don't even know what to say." The camera stayed on her. But this wasn't a mistake. This was the most real she had ever been on national television. "I had questions," she finally said, choking on her own words. "I had doubts." She swallowed, tears escaping down her cheeks now. "I've hosted 1,000 shows. I've seen powerful things, heartbreaking things, strange things. But I have never in my life—" She paused again, her shoulders shaking. "I have never seen anything like this." The studio crew watched from behind their monitors. Some stood stunned, a few lowered their heads, and some, like the audio tech sitting just off stage, nodded slowly with glassy eyes. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was testimony. Vanessa looked toward the audience and then directly at the camera lens. "I don't care what you believe," she said, "but I felt something here today, something I haven't felt in years, and I think, maybe, I needed to see it to remember." Keanu didn't interrupt. Neither did Denzel. They let her have the moment. She turned to them, voice trembling again. "I think God used you to remind us all." She wiped her face and laughed gently through the tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "This isn't the show we planned, but maybe it's the one we needed." In the control room, the broadcast director made a decision without hesitation. He cut the commercial break. The studio would stay live. Backstage, phones buzzed non-stop. Clips of the moment between Keanu and Denzel were already circulating across social media. But now, something unexpected was happening. People weren't just sharing the video, they were sharing their stories. A woman in Milwaukee posted, "I was about to take my own life today. Then I saw this broadcast. I felt God again." A former pastor in London tweeted, "I left the church 15 years ago. This just made me fall to my knees in my kitchen." A man in the Philippines wrote, "I don't understand English fluently, but I understood that hug. It changed me." It was like a digital revival, thousands of comments, then tens of thousands, then millions. Not likes, not clicks, but full paragraphs, full confessions, full redemptions, full. The hashtag #HeStillSpeaks began trending globally. And in the studio, the moment refused to end. Vanessa Cruz took a breath and looked around the room, slowly taking it all in. Keanu, Denzel, the standing crowd, the silence, the tears. "This place feels different," she said quietly. "It feels like a sanctuary." A cameraman off to the side wiped his eyes with the edge of his shirt. The sound engineer took off his headphones, placed them on the table, and bowed his head. The audience didn't move, not even to take out their phones. No one wanted to record it. They wanted to live it. Vanessa turned to Keanu. "Where do you think this happened? Here? On this show?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Because it didn't start here," he said. "It started in the heart of God. This is just where he chose to reveal it." Denzel nodded beside him, adding quietly, "This stage became his altar." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't theological, it was just true. Vanessa blinked again, clearly overwhelmed. A voice from the control booth came through her earpiece, but she didn't react. She had stopped listening to cues. This moment was far bigger than the next segment or the next line. She stepped toward the audience slightly, her voice steady now. "If you've never believed in anything before, or if you lost your faith somewhere along the way, I just want you to know you're not alone. I doubted too. But today, something came back alive in me." People in the studio began nodding, many crying again. "We talk so much on this show about power," Vanessa said, "but I've never felt power like this. It's not loud, it's not controlling, it's holy." Back at home, a father who hadn't spoken to his son in a year picked up the phone. A nurse in a break room texted her sister for the first time since their argument. An atheist teenager sat quietly on the floor, listening to the replay of Keanu's words on loop. He didn't know if he believed yet, but he knew he wanted to. Inside the studio, the lights remained warm, soft, unchanging. No stagehands moved, no countdown clock signaled a shift. And no one, not even the producers, wanted this moment to end. It wasn't a segment anymore. It was a sacred interruption, and the world was listening. In the days that followed the broadcast, the video spread faster than anyone could have predicted. By the end of the first night, over 12 million people had watched it across different platforms, not because it was controversial, not because it was celebrity gossip, but because it was sacred. People weren't just watching the video, they were sharing it with captions like, "This changed me," and "I felt God through my screen." It was the kind of message that didn't need marketing. It traveled through hearts, not headlines. What made the clip unusual wasn't the numbers, it was the response. Underneath the viral posts, the comment sections filled with raw confessions. A woman in Brazil wrote, "I haven't prayed since I lost my baby 2 years ago, but tonight I knelt down again." A man in Germany shared, "I haven't spoken to my brother in 10 years. After watching this, I called him. We both cried. We're meeting next week." A single mother in Detroit posted, "My faith was dry. I felt forgotten. Then I saw Keanu and Denzel cry like that. I just broke, and I felt him again." It wasn't just believers who responded. Atheists commented too, not in mockery, but in curiosity. "I'm not religious," one wrote, "but I couldn't stop crying. What was that?" The most surprising part? There was no preaching in the video, no sermon, no altar call, just honesty, tears, silence, and 2 men humbling themselves in front of the world. Churches began playing the clip during Sunday services. Youth groups played it at retreats. Nursing homes wheeled in TVs to replay it for their residents. Airports, of all places, saw passengers gathered around their phones in quiet groups, moved to tears while waiting for flights. Something had shifted. The media didn't know how to categorize it. Most outlets reported it cautiously. Headlines ranged from "unexpected emotional moment between Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington goes viral" to "spiritual shockwave hits the internet." But no matter how they worded it, the reality couldn't be softened. A movement had begun. It started with humility, not celebrity. With tears, not theology. With presence, not production. People around the world began reflecting on their own lives. They asked themselves hard questions. Where had they gone silent? What pain had they buried? What call had they ignored? Many picked up the phone to say things they had put off for years. Others returned to places of faith, not out of obligation, but hunger. Some simply sat in stillness for the first time in years and whispered, "Are you still there?" In every case, the same answer seemed to come. Not in thunder, not in noise, but in stillness. Yes, I never left. Keanu Reeves remained quiet in the days that followed. He didn't post a follow-up. He didn't do interviews. He didn't capitalize on the attention. He simply returned to his life with the same quiet rhythm he always carried. But something had shifted around him. He began receiving private letters, not fan mail, but handwritten, deeply personal stories from people around the world. One came from a former pop star who had walked away from everything years ago. She wrote, "I have been living in hiding, not physically, but spiritually. When I saw you speak, I cried harder than I've cried in a decade. It wasn't what you said, it was how you said it, like someone who had been found." Another came from a pastor in South Africa. "I've served in ministry for 20 years, he wrote, "but lately I've just been performing, going through the motions. I wept during the broadcast, and afterward I locked myself in my office and repented. Thank you for being obedient." Even a well-known billionaire, who had never spoken publicly about faith, sent a discreet message through mutual contacts. I don't understand what I felt, but it's still with me. And Denzel? He was flooded with messages too. Not just from fans or followers, but from other actors, producers, athletes, even politicians. They didn't reach out for publicity. They wanted counsel. One message said simply, "How did you know it was him?" Another, "Is it too late for someone like me?" Even his own children noticed the change. One of his sons hugged him after watching the clip and whispered, "Dad, you looked free." Denzel just nodded. He didn't need to explain. He felt it too. But it wasn't just the powerful or the public who were moved. It was ordinary people. People in quiet pain. People who had almost given up. In a rural town in Kentucky, a young boy named Micah walked into his grandmother's living room the morning after the broadcast and found her watching it again. She had watched it 5 times already. She was crying, hands folded in her lap. Micah asked her, "Why are you watching that again?" She smiled and said, "Because something in me came back to life." In a refugee shelter outside of Warsaw, a translator pulled up the video and played it for a group of mothers who had lost everything. They didn't speak English, but they watched anyway. They watched Keanu's face, Vanessa's tears, Vanessa's voice breaking, and one by one, they cried too. And then they prayed. No one had led them. They just began. This ripple wasn't emotional hype. It was spiritual hunger being met in a way that didn't require credentials or walls or systems. It was real, and it kept moving. A fire chief in Colorado began opening his morning briefings with a moment of silence after seeing the clip. A high school in Michigan scrapped its planned assembly and instead showed the video to its seniors with the simple message, "Take 5 minutes and reflect." A radio station in Tennessee played the audio of Keanu's final words every morning for a week. Callers phoned in sobbing, saying, "I didn't know I needed that." Keanu and Denzel hadn't planned to start a movement, but one had started. Not organized, not structured, but deeply felt. It had no name, no leader, no platform. Just an echo. He still speaks. He still sees. He still calls. A month after the moment that shook the world, Keanu Reeves stood quietly at the edge of a beach in California, long before the tourists arrived. The sky was still brushing orange over the water, and the only sound was the tide easing in and out like breath. He had come here to be still again, not to reflect on his fame, not to revisit the broadcast, but to listen. Because that's how it had all begun, with a whisper, not a plan. The media was still buzzing. More invitations had come in than he could count. Offers from churches, requests from universities. Even government leaders wanted to meet him, not to talk about policy or movies, but about that moment, the one where everything stood still. But Keanu hadn't accepted any of them. He had no interest in turning the movement into something man-made, because the moment wasn't his, and the glory never belonged to him. He closed his eyes and let the waves roll over his feet. In the quiet, he remembered Denzel's embrace, Vanessa's tears, the silence of the crowd, and the words that kept echoing across the globe. He still speaks. He still sees. He still calls. It wasn't just a sentence anymore. It was a call to the soul. A few days earlier, a package had arrived at his home. Inside was a journal. On the first page, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "After you talked on TV, my dad started praying again. Thank you." Beneath it was a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, one labeled Daddy and the other God. Keanu had sat with that journal for a long time. It was never about numbers. It was never about trends. It was about hearts. He turned from the ocean and began walking back, not because he was finished, but because he had been filled. Meanwhile, in cities and towns across the world, people were still responding. A soldier stationed overseas showed the clip to his entire unit during a night shift. A widow in New Jersey started a small prayer group that met in her kitchen. A high school teacher in Kansas added a new question to her final exam essay. What does it mean to be truly seen? Churches didn't have to ask people to come. They came on their own, and not just for answers. They came for presence. What began with silence had awakened something loud and living. Not everyone understood it. Some tried to dismiss it. Others mocked it. But those who had felt it, truly felt it, could not deny what it had done to them. It didn't make them religious. It made them remembered. Somewhere in Texas, a teenage girl sat in her bedroom, scrolling through comments under the clip. She wasn't raised in church. Her family didn't talk about God. But something about the stillness in Keanu's voice had pierced her heart. She didn't fully understand what was happening to her. All she knew was, after watching, she wanted to whisper something out loud. She sat on the edge of her bed, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "If you're real, I want to know you." That was it. But in that moment, she felt it. Warmth. Not heat, but comfort. Like being remembered. Like being loved, even when you don't know how to love back. And she began to cry without knowing why. Her story wouldn't make headlines, but it would echo. Because hearts like hers, untrained, uncertain, unchurched, were exactly the ones this movement was reaching. Denzel Washington also stepped away from the spotlight. He didn't need to campaign for what had happened. He knew what it was. A visitation. A moment that wasn't about who he was, but who God is. One day, during a walk through Central Park, someone stopped him. A man in his late 40s, clean cut, nervous. He said, "I used to mock believers. I used to say this stuff was for the weak. Then I saw you cry on that stage, and something hit me I can't explain." Denzel didn't preach. He just smiled and said, "He still speaks, man." The man nodded. He started to tear up. And then he said something that stayed with Denzel long after. "You reminded me that faith doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." Back in California, Keanu walked into a small bookstore a week after his visit to the ocean. A woman behind the counter recognized him but didn't say anything at first. When he brought a few books to the register, she scanned them silently. Then she looked up. "My son came back to church because of that video," she said softly. Keanu paused, met her eyes. She added, "I didn't know how to reach him. But somehow, you did." He nodded once. "Not me." She smiled. "I know. That was the pattern. People trying to say thank you." And Keanu gently returning the credit. Not to himself, not to the stage, but to the still, quiet voice that had stirred it all. In the months that followed, the clip continued to ripple, not in massive events or stadium tours, but in quiet rooms, in reconciliation calls, in bedside prayers whispered by people who hadn't spoken to God in years. Something was healing, not just in individuals, but in families, in marriages, in nations. And it had all started because one man had obeyed a whisper from a dream, because another had cried openly before millions, because a third had admitted her doubt live on air. No strategies, no productions, just truth. And the truth had found its way into hearts that were starving for it. So now, to you, yes, you, the one watching this video, maybe late at night or in the quiet space of your own room. You've heard the story. You've seen what happened when two men let their walls fall. And now, one question remains. What would happen if you opened your heart again, not to religion, not to performance, but to the God who still sees, who still speaks, and who may be calling you right now? Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like God was speaking to you through something unexpected? Share your story in the comments and tell us what video you'd love to see next, featuring Keanu Reeves. Thank you for being part of this moment. We'll see you in the next incredible story.